Hi, my name is Daniela, I am 32 years old, and to be honest, I was sure that this Christmas would be exactly the same as all previous ones, with the same unchanging atmosphere of the old house, where every corner seemed to be saturated with the smell of cinnamon, musty wood, and family disappointments, with the same worn-out decorations, which my mother stubbornly puts up from year to year, assuring me that this is the spirit of tradition, with the same relentless tension that hovers between family members, like a thick veil of unresolved grievances and unspoken words. I expected the same leisurely boredom, the same hum of voices at the table where everyone speaks louder than the other, and, of course, the same eternal drama that seems to have long become an integral part of any of our family celebrations. But as it turned out, I was wrong, and I was so wrong that I still can't figure out how it didn't occur to me at all. Let me start from the very beginning, with something that will help you better understand why this particular Christmas has become truly special for me, although perhaps not in the way that adult children dream of returning to their native home. These are my parents. Mom is 58, Dad is 61, and they've been together for 35 years, an impressive period in itself, but especially amazing when you consider that they spent most of their lives under the same roof, in the same two-story brick house with white shutters and an old tiled roof where I once studied. I learned to walk, I learned to talk, and I learned to be silent when there was no point in talking. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I have a younger sister, Sarah. She's 27.5 years old. Mom insists on half, as if those 6 months give her extra charm, and judging by the way her parents treat her, you might think that she's not just the youngest daughter, but something like a family icon who needs to be treated with reverence and endless love. She has a boyfriend named Jake, with whom they have been together for 2 years. Admittedly, he's not a bad guy, polite, well groomed, with that smile that is often depicted on the advertising posters of successful banks, but I've always been annoyed by how he flatters my parents, as if he's afraid of missing out on some invisible privilege that comes with the approval of my father and mother. As a child, no matter how hard I tried, I could never get the same attention that Sarah got. Everything was about her and for her sake. When I was a teenager, I dreamed of joining a theater club and seriously thought that I could be on stage at least once. My mother regretfully said that there was no extra money in the budget, and when Sarah wanted to dance a few years later, it turned out that there was money for costumes, for an expensive teacher, and even for performances in another city. I graduated from high school with honors and made my way to college solely thanks to a full scholarship, which I had to earn through nights full of textbooks and coffee. Sarah's tuition was paid in full, without asking a single question. Over the years, I've learned not to be surprised. It's always been like this in our family. Sarah is a golden child, someone who needs to be protected, supported, and admired, and I'm just an adult, responsible daughter who you can rely on, and who, according to her parents, doesn't need any help. Well, that's it. I came home on Christmas Eve, as I do every year. The house was filled with voices and smells, as if the space itself came alive when we got together. They were already drinking egg liqueur in the living room, someone was laughing, someone was arguing. In general, everything was as usual. There was Uncle Alvise, telling his hackneyed jokes with a smug look, Aunt Chiara, excited about every little thing, my cousins Tom and Lisa, engrossed in discussing their new gadgets, and, of course, Grandma Rose, who was always complaining about her health, but never missed a single holiday. Daniela. Mom hugged me tightly, smelling faintly of perfume and kitchen spices. How are you doing, dear? It's okay, Mom, actually, it's very good, I replied with a smile. I work in marketing, in a technology company, I earn well, I rent a cozy apartment, and I'm already saving for the down payment. That's wonderful, honey, she said, and I felt her gaze slip past me, toward the front door, as if she were waiting for someone else. I went into the kitchen to help finish the dinner preparations, but I couldn't help but notice something was strange about the atmosphere. Mom and Dad exchanged glances all the time, in which barely restrained joy could be read, and when Sarah finally appeared, beaming like an actress at a premiere, covered in kisses and hugs with Jake, their faces lit up with real glee. They were whispering and talking, and I felt a bad feeling coming from somewhere deep inside me. Are you okay, Sarah? I asked her when she put a plate of baked pumpkin on the table, laughing. Oh, I'm just great, she replied, smiling broadly, "this evening is going to be amazing." I shrugged my shoulders. Maybe Jake was going to propose to her, and all this mystery was just a romantic idea. In any case, none of this concerned me. Around 7 in the evening, we sat down at the table. Mom used her best tea set, the one you only get for the holidays. Dad solemnly butchered the turkey. Uncle Alvise told another ridiculous story about his neighbor, and Grandma Rose complained that she was cold. Despite the blanket, everything went on as usual, until Mom suddenly tapped her fork on the glass. "Guys, I'm asking for your attention, please." Her voice was ringing with excitement, her face was glowing. There was silence in the house. Even Grandma stopped whispering to Lisa. Dad got up from his seat, stood next to Mom, and I suddenly felt the air in the room become thicker. "Your father and I," Mom began, barely holding back tears, "we want to share with you some wonderful news. We've been planning this for a long time. We bought an apartment for Sarah," Dad added, beaming, "a 2-room apartment in Riverside Heights." There was a real explosion in the room, applause, cheers, shouts of joy. Sarah jumped to her feet and hugged her parents, but there was no surprise or shock in her eyes, only confirmation that she had known about this for a long time. "Oh my God, really? What is it?" she exclaimed, though there was no doubt in her voice. "Yes, dear," Mom whispered, crying now, "it's all yours." I sat with my fork halfway to my mouth, as if I had suddenly lost the taste for everything that a minute ago seemed cozy and festive, and I felt something cold and heavy creep inside me, filling my chest with something like a hazy bewilderment, in which a single thought was beating: an apartment? They bought her a whole, real, ready-to-move-in apartment. Dad, beaming as if he had just won a medal for fatherhood, added that the deal was about to close, that the apartment was located in a beautiful area, Riverside Heights, close to shops, cafes, and a subway station, and that the windows offered stunning views of the park, where magnolias bloom in spring and golden in autumn, maple trees sprinkle the paths with foliage. Everyone started talking excitedly, gesturing, discussing details, asking questions about the layout, furniture, repairs, as if something truly historic had happened. Sarah, beaming with happiness, showed everyone photos on her phone. Apparently, she had already managed to visit there, take pictures from different angles, and even figure out how to arrange the furniture. "It's so beautiful," she said, hugging Mom and Dad with that greedy tenderness that she always did flawlessly. "Jake and I were just discussing that we need more space." "Well, you'll need it soon." Dad winked with a conspiratorial expression, and immediately there were cheers, fuss, congratulations, and I suddenly realized that everyone was taking this as a harbinger of engagement, and maybe even something more. Jake shook Dad's hand tightly, smiling like a winner at an award ceremony, and everyone around him was saying in unison, "What a joy, congratulations, it's just a miracle." And at that moment I had to applaud along with everyone else, because otherwise it would look strange. And my hands, clenched in my lap, were shaking. They were mechanically clapping my hands on my knees, although inside I felt as if someone had hit me hard in the ribs. Flat, they gave her an apartment. The same daughter who has been counting every penny for years, who has denied herself trips, designer bags, and spontaneous purchases, saving up for a down payment for a small, if not perfect, apartment, and now, they just give Sarah the keys to a new nest. "Daniela, isn't that wonderful?" Suddenly I heard my mother's voice reaching across the table to me. "Yes," I managed to say, without taking my eyes off my plate, "it's very cool, congratulations, Sarah." My sister ran up to me, naively, childishly enthusiastic, and hugged me, smelling of her expensive perfume. "I'm so excited. I'm already planning a housewarming party. You're all coming, aren't you? I want everyone to be there, just like today." "Of course we'll be there, dear," Uncle Alvise said, clapping her on the shoulder. "Congratulations, kid." I smiled because it was supposed to, because everyone was smiling, but something settled inside, like I'd swallowed sand. No one has ever given me anything even close to an apartment. Why, they've never given me anything more than a couple $100. For a birthday, for Christmas, for graduation, and Sarah needs an apartment. The rest of the dinner turned into a never-ending conversation about the apartment. Sarah talked about which wallpaper she wanted for the bedroom, which curtains would fit into the living room, which sofa she and Jake had already looked at, and how it would fit comfortably into the corner so that they could look at the park. Jake talked about how easy it would be to get to his office. How glad he was that they wouldn't have to huddle in his old studio anymore, and Mom and Dad said how proud they were to be able to make such a gift. I sat across from him, silently finishing the turkey, trying to seem happy, drawing on my face an expression in which there was not a shadow of a prick, not a shadow of envy, not a shadow of alienation. No one asked me how my quarter went at work, what I'm working on right now, or what my plans are. Everything, as always, revolved around Sarah, and it would have been almost comical if it hadn't hurt so much. "I can't wait to see you all at my place," Sarah repeated again, her eyes shining. Her voice was half a tone higher than usual. "This is going to be so much fun." "We're so happy for you, darling," Mom whispered, squeezing her hand. I looked around the table at everyone, uncle, aunt, cousins, grandmother, parents, Jake, Sarah. They all shared the same emotion, the same joy, as if someone had achieved a great victory. And at that moment I realized that some things don't change. Sarah was the favorite, and I am an eternal background, a shadow that you can rely on, but which is never put under the light. After dinner, the men settled down in the living room to watch football, loud, rhythmic, distracting from thoughts. The women gathered at Sarah's phone, flipping through pictures of the apartment, discussing tiles in the kitchen, built-in appliances, floor-to-ceiling windows. Children, rattling toys and wrappers, played among tinsel and paper snowflakes. As usual, I helped my mother with the dishes. The monotonous movement of my hands, drops of water, and the soft clink of plates helped me not to think. "The apartment is really beautiful," I said, trying to sound sincere as I loaded the dishes into the dishwasher. "Isn't that right?" Mom turned to me. "We reviewed so many things before we settled on this one. I'm sure Sarah will be very happy there." I nodded, lowering my eyes. What else could I say? Almost an hour passed. The guests began to move around the house. Someone took out a board game, someone sat down with a glass of wine. I was sitting next to Grandma Rose, listening to her soft grumbling about her back and how different everything was when she was young, when Mom came up to me and bent down a little. "Daniela, can you help me in the kitchen for a minute?" "Of course," I said, getting up, deciding that she was asking for help with dessert or to refresh the serving. But when I entered the kitchen, the first person I saw was Dad. He was standing at the edge of the table with a serious expression on his face. He had a thick folder in his hands, and there was that heaviness in the air that usually precedes an important conversation. Both of them looked like they were about to say something big. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to figure out why everything had suddenly become so official. Dad handed me a folder. I opened it and saw neatly folded papers printed on standard white paper with bank logos. The headlines were familiar: mortgage, loan application, payment schedule. "What is it?" I flipped through the pages in disbelief, unable to put the picture together right away. "This," Mom began, pausing. "These are the documents for the mortgage of Sarah's apartment." I looked at them, not immediately understanding what was happening right now, as if someone had suddenly changed the scenario of my life without informing me, and said, trying to keep my voice level, although a familiar lump of resentment was already beginning to rise inside, "Okay, why are you giving them away?" Mom, as if not catching the intonation, shrugged her shoulders with some ridiculous lightness, which finally threw me off balance. "Well, we only had enough for the initial payment, you need to pay for the rest." I automatically put the folder on the kitchen counter, as if its very weight was starting to burn my fingers, and, staring intently at both of them, I asked in a louder voice, "Wait, do you seriously want me to pay off Sarah's mortgage?" The father and mother, as if on cue, nodded synchronously, without a shadow of hesitation, as if they were talking about something every day, something that had been decided long ago, as if it were a matter of course, as if all this absurdity did not require no explanations, no discussions. "We know you have savings," Mom said in the same tone she used when she was a child to explain why Sarah needed a new doll and I didn't. "You told us yourself, you make good money, you have a stable job, it won't be a big problem." "Yes," my father said, and suddenly there was a note of urgency in his voice. "And this, by the way, is a way to prove that you really love your sister." At that moment, I felt as if I had suddenly found myself in some kind of surreal dream, in that very alternate reality where common sense had been abolished, where moral boundaries had blurred, and where native people calmly, looking into your eyes, demanded that you sacrifice your dream in order to make your youngest daughter happy once again. Yes, I did have savings, and for years I had been adding up every possible penny, consciously giving up everything that went beyond what was necessary. Because I had a clear plan, next year I was going to buy my own home, even if it was small, modest, but my own. Daniela, please, Mom said, taking a step closer, we're a family, and a family should stick together. I shook my head, feeling a wave of anger coursing through my neck and shoulders, too hot to contain, but too old to be surprised by it. No, I said, looking straight into his eyes, I won't pay someone else's mortgage. I worked, I saved, for myself, not for Sarah. I don't have to sacrifice my plans because you wanted to please your youngest daughter again. The father flushed, his face turned purple, and his voice, usually restrained, rang with irritation. To tell you the truth, you don't need an apartment, you're already 32 years old, and you're still single, you don't have a boyfriend, you don't have any prospects, you'll end up an old maid, without a husband, without children. These words sounded like a slap in the face, loud, humiliating, uninvited. I stood motionless, not even blinking, feeling the silence between us thicken, as if both the house and time had frozen in that instant. Then I slowly turned to my mom, hoping, naively, stupidly, that she would say something to protect me, to stop this verbal blow, but she just stood with her eyes downcast, silent, as if she had nothing to add, a silence that spoke more than any words. I'm not paying for Sarah's apartment, I repeated, and there was no tremor in my voice. Never. You're being selfish, my father said. I took my coat, scarf, and purse, trying not to look at them, not to say another word, because I knew one more sentence and I wouldn't hold back. I headed for the door, feeling eyes on me, even though no one else was saying anything. Daniela, where are you going? Sarah asked, sitting on the couch, sparkling with her happy eyes full of rosy hopes, dreaming of a housewarming party and not even suspecting that at this very moment her older sister had learned everything she needed to know. I'm not well, I replied shortly, not even looking in her direction. I need to get home. I walked out the door without saying goodbye to anyone. I walked along the snow-covered path, feeling the ice creak under my feet, tears running down my cheeks, not because it was cold, but because it felt as empty inside as it had never been. I knew they wouldn't come out and stop me. Mom and Dad will stay inside and are probably already explaining to the family that I wasn't feeling well, that something had suddenly hit me, and no one should worry. The journey home stretched out as if time had slowed down. The wind hummed through the openings, and the few lanterns cast long, lonely shadows. As I drove through the empty streets, my father's voice rang in my head over and over again, cold and confident. You will end up an old maid. It's like my loneliness is a stain, a stigma, a sentence. It's like my life has no value if it doesn't have a husband, a ring, a stroller on the doorstep. When I got to my apartment, I sat in the car for a long time, unable to even get out, just looking out the dark window of the entrance, where not a single light was on. Most people were probably still at their family Christmas dinners, laughing, drinking, hugging. I slowly went up to my quiet, lonely apartment, turned on the light, poured myself a glass of wine and, without turning on the TV, without turning on the music, sat on the sofa and burst into tears. I spent Christmas alone, thinking about how differently my parents always treated me and Sarah, how from year to year, from gesture to gesture, they showed that she was the beloved, the chosen one, the one for whom everything was possible, and I was just reliable, background, an adult, and nothing has changed, nothing. The next morning, December 25th, in the silence of Christmas morning, the phone rang. It was Mom. I didn't answer right away, letting the phone ring a little longer than usual, and somewhere inside I naively assumed that she was calling to apologize. Daniela, we need to talk, she said at once, without greeting. You were acting hysterical last night. We had to tell everyone that you were sick, that you were ill. That's why you left so suddenly. I froze. Was that really all they understood? Did all they cared about was how they looked in front of others? Are you serious now? I asked, and my voice became colder than the winter morning outside the window. I'll bring you these documents today. You have to sign them and start paying. Mom, I said, slowly, clearly, as if I were talking to someone who had just forgotten who I was. I've already told you, I'm not paying Sarah's mortgage. Yes, you will, that's what a family does. No, I won't, I said it so clearly, as if I had put into those 3 words everything I hadn't been able to say in all these years. I will never pay the mortgage on Sarah's apartment. And I hung up the phone. The phone immediately rang again, almost immediately. As soon as I managed to hang up, the screen lit up with a familiar name again, and a moment later there was another call, and then another, as if they hoped that persistence and pressure could erase what was said. I didn't answer, I just sat there, clutching the glass in my fingers, feeling everything inside shrink with fatigue and resentment, and looking at the blinking phone screen as if it were something alien, unkind, and completely not belonging to me anymore. Then I turned off the sound, at first just to make it quieter, so as not to flinch from every call, but then, when a series of messages began to arrive, I realized that silence was what I needed most. Dad, with his usual pathos, sent a long message about family loyalty, in which there was not a single word of sympathy, not a shadow of understanding, only demands and accusations. My mother wrote that they were deeply disappointed that I had let them down, that they had not expected such cruelty from me, and that they simply did not know how they would look other people in the eye now. I have not replied to any of these messages. I didn't even open them completely, letting them just hang in the chat history like uncovered wounds. The next day, when I finally felt a little lighter, a little calmer, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. I hesitated, but I answered anyway, hoping, at least partly, that my sister would say something that would help bring back some common sense to what was happening. Daniela, she said almost without pause, I heard what happened. I can't believe how cruel you are. My apartment is more important than your savings. You can always save up more, later, then. I almost laughed, not from joy, but from some kind of withering surprise. Sarah, do you even understand what you're asking me to do? I asked calmly, trying not to succumb to a new wave of anger. If you really love me, she continued with that feigned seriousness that always drove me crazy, you'll pay for my mortgage. That's what sisters do. That's what family members do. What have you done for me, Sarah? I asked, knowing there would be no answer. It doesn't matter. The important thing right now is that I need help, and you're being selfish. I just hung up the phone. I didn't have the energy to talk anymore. I immediately went into the phone settings and blocked all their numbers. Mom, Dad, Sarah, I finished. I didn't want to hear, see, or feel them around anymore, and for the first time in many years, I felt my lungs fill with air, for real, freely, full. A month passed, and everything was amazingly quiet. Silence has become my solace, my shield, my medicine. I worked, came home, watched TV shows on Netflix, drank wine in the evenings, walked in the park alone, and, most surprisingly, I felt calm. I even started looking for apartments online again, looking at agency websites, comparing layouts, calculating mortgages, and for the first time in a long time, I began to imagine what my living room would look like if it were really mine. I almost believed that they finally understood that I would not back down, that I was no longer 17 years old and that I was not obligated to fulfill their whims. I even thought that maybe they had found another way, maybe they borrowed money from friends or relatives, maybe they sold the apartment. Anyway, I'd decided it's not my problem anymore. I was wrong. On Tuesday morning, at the end of January, when I was half asleep choosing what to wear to work, a gray dress or trousers with a jacket, I heard a rustle outside the door. Postman, nothing unusual. The mail always arrives on Tuesdays, mostly invoices and catalogs. I went out into the hallway, went down to the drawer, and was about to return upstairs when my gaze caught on a thick envelope with an official label. He stood out from the rest of the correspondence. The return address made my stomach clench. Morrison, Klein and Associates. I had never heard of such a law firm, but I knew it was something serious. When I returned to the apartment and, sitting down on the sofa, tore open the thick edge of the envelope, my hands were shaking as if in a fever. The letterhead was immaculately decorated, the logo was embossed, the paper was thick, almost heavy, but what I read left me speechless. Dear Miss Daniela Johnson, we represent the interests of Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Linda Johnson in a civil lawsuit regarding the reimbursement of child rearing costs. I reread this phrase 3 times, trying to believe that I really see such words on paper. The cost of education. I continued reading, as if in a dream. It said that my parents were demanding $280,000 from me, allegedly for the years they had spent on my upkeep, food, clothing, housing, medical care, education, even, I couldn't believe my eyes, emotional support and guidance. They claimed that I was obligated to reimburse them for these funds because I refused to help my family in a difficult moment, despite the sacrifices they made for me. I sank back onto the couch, not believing that this was happening to me in reality. Parents, court, for the upbringing, it wasn't just an attempt to pressure me, it was an attack, an attempt to put me in a corner, intimidate, break me, make me change my mind and turn myself in. It was the price for my disobedience, for saying no. My first thought was to go there to them, to my childhood home, look them in the eye and tell them that this is crazy, that we can sit down and talk, that no one should come to this, but then I realized that's exactly what they're waiting for, to make me flinch, to give up. Instead, I did what I should have done right away. I called Marcus. We went to college together. He's been practicing law for a long time, and if anyone could tell me how serious this really is, it was him. Marcus, this is Daniela. I need your help with something. Hey, how are you? Marcus's familiar, slightly tired, but still friendly voice sounded on the phone. My parents sued me for $280,000, I said without preamble, because I didn't know where else to start. I didn't know how to put into decent words all this absurdity in which I found myself. I told him everything, from the very beginning, from that dinner that started with china plates and family toasts, and ended with a demand to pay off the mortgage of someone else's apartment. I talked about how I held that folder with bank documents in my hands, how I argued with my father, how I left home in tears and loneliness, how I turned off my phone, blocked them all, hoping that at least silence would save me from further pain, and, finally, how I opened that letter from the lawyers, with an unbearable amount and a monstrous accusation that I dared to be independent. He listened to me in silence, without interrupting, and only at the end, when I had exhaled every last emotion, said dully, "My God, Daniela, this is madness. Can they do it?" I asked, and there was a note of hope in my voice, almost childlike, like a person who still hopes that there is a mistake, a joke, a misunderstanding behind this nightmare. Can parents actually sue their child for bringing him up? They can try, Marcus sighed, but it won't work. Parents are legally required to support their minor children. This is not an option, not a service for which you can then submit an invoice. It's a duty. You can't demand money for something you've done legally. So you think I'm going to win? I think, he said calmly, that this case will be dismissed so quickly that it will make their heads spin, but we have to react properly, don't ignore it in any way. After talking to Marcus, I really felt a little better. At least the panic began to recede, and in its place came a fragile feeling that I was not completely alone in this fight. But despite the confidence in Marcus' voice, I was still in a state of stupor, not from the legal threat per se, but from the fact that my parents, my mom and dad, really considered it possible and fair to sue me for refusing to be a victim of their injustice. It took 2 months before the case went to trial. During this time, Marcus managed to collect all the necessary documents, prepare a summary of events, study the family code inside and out, and all this time I watched myself as if from the outside, as if I were watching a film about someone else's life in which a daughter must prove that she should not pay for parental disappointment. On the day of the hearing, I entered the courthouse with a heavy but collected heart. I was nervous, yes, but also determined, because I knew that no matter what happened, there was no turning back. Marcus walked beside him, carrying a leather briefcase that contained neatly sorted evidence, documents, and excerpts from legislation. In the courtroom, my parents were already sitting with a lawyer, a thin, worried man in a perfectly pressed suit who looked as if he had already been to dinner. Somewhere else in his mind, behind them, in the gallery, Sarah was sitting with her chin held high and giving me looks full of condemnation and, perhaps, a little hidden triumph. "Everyone stand in front of the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams," the bailiff's voice rang out, and the entire courtroom rose. The judge was a woman in her 50s with short-cropped gray hair and glasses on a chain. There was not a drop of sentimentality in her gaze, only the tired severity of a person who knows all too well how absurd family lawsuits can be. "This is Johnson v. Johnson," she said, glancing at the papers. "The plaintiffs are demanding $280,000 from the defendant for the costs of raising a child." My parents' lawyer stood up, straightened up, and began a speech that, judging by the intonation, he had been rehearsing for more than one evening. "Your Honor, My clients raised the defendant from birth to the age of 18, they provided her with food, shelter, clothing, medical care, and education. They believe that they are entitled to reimbursement of these costs, especially given the defendant's refusal to help the family in a difficult financial situation. Judge Williams, openly skeptical, looked at him over the top of her glasses. Mr. Peterson, are you seriously arguing that parents can demand payment from a child for fulfilling the basic duties of parenthood? Your Honor, he replied, less confidently. The defendant was extremely ungrateful, and that's not what I was asking, she interrupted. I asked if you think that parents have the right to charge a child for what they were required to do by law. Peterson hesitated, clearly unable to find the right argument. The situation is more complicated, Your Honor. Mr. Rodriguez, she turned to Marcus. Thank you, Your Honor. He stood up. We ask that this case be dismissed immediately. According to Section 3900 of the California Family Code, parents are required to support their minor children. These expenses are not reimbursable, as they were performed within the framework of legitimate parental responsibilities. In addition, the plaintiffs claim that they provided support beyond the mandatory one. In what way? The judge asked sternly, turning to Peterson. He fumbled through the papers, then said, they've created a loving, homely atmosphere. Mr. Peterson, she interrupted, let me ask the plaintiffs directly. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, tell me, how exactly did you help your daughter after she turned 18? Dad stood up. Well, we supported her emotionally, Your Honor. Did you pay for her college tuition? No. Did you buy her a car? No. Did you help her with rent or housing expenses? No, she's always been independent, he said uncertainly. Did you provide her with any financial assistance after she came of age? Mom and Dad exchanged glances, not directly, Dad muttered, but we had to. The judge turned to Marcus. Mr. Rodriguez, what do your documents show? Your Honor, he stood up. These documents confirm that Miss Johnson did not receive any financial support from her parents after she reached adulthood. She studied on a full academic scholarship, and paid for rent, car maintenance, and all personal expenses herself. Meanwhile, the plaintiffs paid for the education of their youngest daughter, Sarah, in full and recently purchased an apartment for her. Is that true? Judge Williams asked, looking over the top of her glasses, as if she wanted not only to hear the answer, but also to look deeper into the essence of what was happening, into the conscience of the people sitting in front of her. My parents, I said involuntarily, when I saw Mom and Dad look down at the same time, their faces turning pink, as if someone had ripped off their masks of decency and forced them to look in the mirror, which they had so diligently avoided before. Sarah, Mom began in a low voice. She always needed more support. Every week we just tried to help, Dad added, although even in his voice there was no longer the same pressure. So, Judge Williams summed up with iron directness, you provided significant financial support to one of your adult children without providing any help to the other. And now you want the child to whom you gave nothing to pay you $280,000 for his own upbringing? That's not quite true, the father tried to object, but the judge interrupted him with a look full of cold bewilderment. Then what's the point, Mr. Johnson? She said, and in the silence that hung in the hall, Sarah could be clearly heard sobbing from the back row, burying her face in a napkin. He couldn't answer, he just lowered his head, like a man who has been caught in a lie that is too loud to be hidden in any way. The judge looked at the papers again, ran her eyes over the lines, and her voice sounded clear, without a shadow of doubt. This case has been dismissed, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. You are responsible for paying all of the defendant's legal fees and expenses. Parents cannot charge children for basic parental care. This claim is not only legally untenable, but also, frankly, absurd. The case is closed. The hammer hit the wood, as if putting a seal on my rightness, and at that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt more than just relief. I felt the tension that had been lingering for years disappear in me at once, but with that came sadness. It was over, yes, but at what cost? The consequences came quickly and painfully, and not for me, but for them. The very next day after the hearing, Uncle Alvise called me. There was concern in his voice, bordering on remorse. Daniela, I just found out what happened. We didn't know, neither me, nor Chiara. If we had only guessed that they were planning this, we would have stopped them. Truth, we can't believe your parents would do this. Then Aunt Chiara called, then my cousins, then even people I barely knew from Sunday church services. Everyone was in shock, everyone was saying the same thing: have they gone crazy? Parents shouldn't do that. Grandma Rose called me later than everyone else, but her voice was especially firm. I raised 5 children, she said, and I never thought of charging them money for giving birth to them. This is our duty, Daniela, not a service that can be monetized later. I do not know what happened to them. But the greatest damage was inflicted not so much on my family as on my parents' environment. They went to the same church for almost 20 years. Mom participated in a sorority, led needlework circles. Dad collected donations, participated in the council. They had their own reputation, social circle, established order, and it all started to crumble. At first, they stopped being invited to soirees. Then the book club expelled Mom without explanation. The Pope was no longer invited to meetings of the church council. They became outcasts among those whom they considered friends. The rumors spread quickly, and no one wanted to deal with parents who were suing their own child because she refused to pay for her sister's apartment. But it wasn't the shame that was the worst, it was the money that was the worst. They hired an expensive lawyer who charged them $15,000 in advance for the case, which was rejected at the first hearing, and then the legal fees, the reimbursement of my attorney's fees, all the bills. They didn't have that kind of money. They had already spent everything they could on the down payment of the apartment they had bought for Sarah. And that's exactly what led to the worst consequence. 3 months after the hearing, Marcus called me again. "You won't believe this," he began. "I just saw the ad. Sarah's apartment is back on the market. They couldn't pay the mortgage without your money." I sat up and exhaled slowly. The feelings were mixed. On the one hand, it was confirmation that I was right, that my no was justified, but on the other, it was still a human tragedy. "Did they sell the apartment?" I asked. "They had to," Marcus said. "The bank has started the foreclosure process. Apparently, they couldn't pull the payments. I even found an ad, the same apartment, now looking for a new owner." I felt a strange feeling, satisfaction that justice had been done, but also sadness. Sarah lost what I knew was her dream. She planned to decorate it, maybe raise a child there, and make it cozy. Now it's all gone. But the truth was, she was responsible too. She knew where the money was supposed to come from, and she was willing to accept it without hesitation. "Where does she live now?" I asked Marcus. "Rumor has it that she and Jake have found a small apartment in another neighborhood. We went back to renting." I nodded. Poor thing, flashed through my mind, but then disappeared. She might have been a poor thing if she hadn't been so sure that my life was her backup source of comfort. Months have passed. I started living like before again, work, evenings in silence, looking for an apartment, which finally began to bring joy. I found a wonderful option, a bright 2-room apartment with windows facing south, which I was thinking of renting, and for the first time in a long time I imagined the future without looking back at the past. And then, 6 months after the trial, the phone rang, unknown number. I was about to click reject, but something, intuition, curiosity, I don't know, made me respond. "Hi, Daniela, it's Mom." I froze. "Listen," she began cautiously, "I wanted to talk. Please, just listen to me. I think we should meet. Maybe we can talk about everything, forget all this makeup." I almost laughed when I heard the word makeup slip through the phone in such a casual, almost apologetic tone, as if the conversation was about some minor disagreement over salted soup or a forgotten birthday, and not about the fact that my own parents sued me for $280,000 for daring to be their daughter. "It was a mistake," Mom said, and for the first time her voice sounded uncertain, almost plaintive. "We were just upset about the situation with the apartment. Everything happened too fast, and we weren't thinking clearly. Mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, sitting down on the couch and cupping my temple in my palm. "You hired a lawyer, you went to court, you sat down in front of the judge and swore that I owed you almost $300,000 for feeding me breakfast as a child. It's not a mistake, Mom, it's a choice." I know, she whispered, "but we're a family, Daniela. We must be able to cope with difficulties. We have to be above it." "Family?" I chuckled, because the word sounded like mockery coming from her. "Do you want to talk about family?" Where was my family when I worked nights as a waitress to graduate from college? Where was my family when I was living in a rented room with no heating and trying to start a career? Where was my family when I was saving every spare penny, giving up vacations, gifts, and days off to buy my own place? We were next to you, she tried to object, but I immediately interrupted. No, you were with Sarah, we were always there for Sarah, what about me? I was the one who could handle it, someone who doesn't need help, someone who can take it all, remember? You said that yourself. That's not true. It's true, and you know it, and now that your precious Sarah has lost her dream, do you suddenly want to forget about everything and make peace? Just because your plan failed? There was silence on the other end, and even if I hadn't seen the face, I would have known that my mother had lowered her eyes, as she had in court. Daniela, please, can't we put this in the past? No, I said calmly, we can't. You showed me who you are, and who I've been to you all this time, and now I can no longer pretend that it never happened. I don't want to live in an illusion. I don't want to be the one who swallows everything in order to preserve the facade again. But we're your parents. Parents don't sue their children for feeding and dressing them. Parents don't call their daughters spinsters who don't deserve their apartment. Parents don't demand that one child sacrifice everything so that the other can live a beautiful life. We made mistakes. No, Mom, these are not mistakes, it's you, it's your choice. You've been doing just that for many years. I just finally stopped making excuses for it. So you're never going to talk to us again? I slowly looked around my apartment, my quiet, cozy, peaceful apartment, where there were no accusations. No quarrels, no past victims, no need to constantly prove that you were worth something. I saw the walls that I had chosen myself, the color of the curtains that I liked, the books placed on the shelves without anyone's interference, and I realized that I did not want to return to those who consider my independence to be selfishness. I don't want anything to do with you, I said with clear firmness. I am happy with my life, I am successful, I am independent, and I don't need your approval or your love if they're set on conditions. I hung up the phone, she didn't call back. 2 months later, I closed the deal. My own apartment is my fortress, light walls, parquet floors, a kitchen with granite countertops, huge windows through which the sun pours in the morning, everything I dreamed of when I was counting pennies instead of spending them on other people's whims. The down payment that I've been saving up for years has finally become an investment in my freedom. The very money that my parents demanded to pay for Sarah's apartment has now become the key to my future. I'm 33, I'm still single, I'm still focused on my career. Maybe Dad was right, maybe I'll just stay an old maid, as he said with contempt. But if loneliness is the price for inner peace, for a choice without blackmail, for the opportunity to be myself, then I am ready to pay it with pride. I have my own place, my own life, your voice, and no one, not even those who gave me life, has the right to demand that I pay for other people's dreams by giving up my own. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah realized that their plan had failed miserably, that instead of getting an apartment from me, she was left with nothing but rent and her parents, who ruined their reputation by trying to break me. But you know what? It's not my concern anymore, not my pain, it's not my responsibility. I realized that the best thing you can do for yourself is to get away from those who never really appreciated you, even if these people are your family. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.